Welcome. I'll try and hide this back a little bit. Before I hand it over to our inclusion captains, co-captains, Tavona and Emily, I want to thank the Inclusion Committee for all the work that they've done leading into today, and also just draw your attention to the fact that this camera is doing a live stream, and so it's got a really sensitive microphone. And if you want to have conversations with your friends or reflect on what's being spoken about today, you might just want to shift away from that camera. So while everyone is walking in, I'll also close that door, and then I'll hand over to Emily and Tavona.
Well, happy Neurodiversity Celebration Week, everyone. We're your inclusion co-captains for this year, Emily
and Tavona. We both use she, her.
And thank you to everyone for joining us today to honour the variance of human brains and the achievements neurodivergent people have made individually and collectively through each person's unique perspective. We can see this every day throughout our incredible Macrob community and in how we uplift each other every day.
Recognising neurodiversity is incredibly important, particularly at a high-achieving students' school with high expectations set on our success, as well as many of us being assigned female from immigrant families or being people of colour, where our experiences of neurodivergence tend to be minimised and scrutinised. To all our neurodivergent peers in the audience, we recognise you and appreciate you. Thank you for coming today. And now we'd like to bring in Neha to do the acknowledgement of country.
Before we introduce Jazz, we wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Bunurong people of the Kulon Nation, the first human thinkers, innovators, and creators of the great multiplicity of mind on being on this land. We acknowledge sovereignty was never ceded, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. We pay our respects to the Bunurong elders, past, present, and in the future. We extend our respects to any First Nations peoples present today.
Now could you please bring Antara in here?
On behalf of our school community, we would like to welcome and extend our appreciation to Dr. Jessica Riordan, who is a research fellow at the University of Melbourne and co-founder of the University of Melbourne Neurodiversity Project.
With a PhD in developmental psychology and lived experiences of ADHD and autism, she specializes in neurodiversity-focused research, advocacy, and education. We are so thankful to have her here at Macrob to educate and allow us to ask questions regarding her research and experiences. Please put your hands together for Dr. Jessica Riordan.
Now, can everyone hear me at the back? Yes? Great. Alright, I am going to put my own timekeeping on as an accommodation for myself. I have been known to go on side tangents when I give talks, and there's a lot of things I want to cover today. I'll pop that here. And so I titled this talk Celebrating Neurodiversity, Embracing Strengths and Building Inclusive Futures. Kind of to reflect the email, the wonderful email I got a few weeks ago asking me to come here. I was supposed to be saying no to talks at the moment because we're in the middle of a few big projects, but I have a soft spot for schools that really empower students like you, and I also have a soft spot for people who take risks and have the confidence to email someone and ask something that may have been a little bit uncomfortable, and I just couldn't say no. Also because that's actually how our project started. Is it too quiet? Sure. Yeah, so that's how our neurodiversity project actually started, by us taking a risk and sending a very audacious, I kind of call it audacity, so autistic audacity, email ourselves to try and solve a problem that we saw at the University of Melbourne. But I really wanted to give you an outline of what I'm going to talk about today, so you can see why I have to have a timekeeper, and it will help keep me on track to share with you what I want to talk about. And so first it's going to be a brief introduction to neurodiversity, the many strengths of neurodivergent minds, steps to success, and how we can all build a more inclusive community before touching on some takeaways for you all. And just before I start, who here has heard about neurodiversity? Okay, most of you. So this might be knowledge that you already have, but I always like to start my talks with this brief introduction, just to make sure we're all on the same page when I start getting into the more deeper stuff. And that is, neurodiversity is a perspective that positions neurological differences, so autism, ADHD, dyslexia, OCD, as identities, and really part of natural variation in humanity. And it's not deficits to be fixed. It's kind of like biodiversity. So when we talk about neurodiversity, we mean everyone on the planet. If you get people to have brain scans, there are no two alike brain scans. But it's also become this social cultural movement, and if you've seen any of my other talks, you've seen me talk about this a bit more, but it has this really emerging frameworks for research and practice and just kind of moving through the world, really. And it's become a bit of a huge cultural shift and a discussion in the last 10 years, although it was founded in the late 90s. And some key terms before I launch into it, these are important to know. So neurotypical, so this is an umbrella term. There's a lot of umbrella terms in this movement. And this refers to people whose neurology falls within what we consider typical societal norms. And the societal norms thing is really important because different societies around the world have different norms. So some people who may find it troubling here to kind of fit in may fit in better with some other cultures. It's all completely different. And neurodivergent is another umbrella term, but this one is referring to the 10 to 20% of people, that's the current estimates in Australia, whose neurology falls outside what is considered typical societal norms. And this is typically associated with a formal diagnostic label, but it doesn't have to be. This is a really, really small estimate. It's actually thought to be much higher than this for many reasons. Again, that could be a whole nother talk. But that's what we're working with at the moment. And neurotype. So this is an umbrella term referring to types of neurology. So autism, ADHD, or ADHD, like myself, the combination of autism and ADHD does have some fun coming with it, but it also has some challenges, and it does look quite different to someone who just identifies as autistic or someone who just identifies as an ADHDer. And this is the type of term we like to use rather than condition or disorder. And I'll go into that in a little bit as well. So this is an umbrella I have kind of put together with lots of the different neurotypes under it. You can see it is a far-reaching umbrella, and this is not at all exhaustive of who falls under it. Basically, the idea is if your neurology differs and you identify as neurodivergent, you're included. And you don't have to be formally diagnosed. Self-diagnosis is completely valid because we know the diagnostic system at the moment is very flawed in terms of waiting lists and costs, and not picking up people assigned female at birth because we present differently. And so what does it mean to be neurodiversity affirming? There are lots of different things that fall under the neurodiversity paradigm, but these 5 I like to talk about, 5 really important ones. The first is that we view neurological differences as value neutral, like handedness and eye colour. It's just another part of ourselves. We focus on the strengths of neurodivergent people, not just deficits, which has been the focus for a really long time. We challenge harmful stereotypes, stigma and misinformation whenever we can. We shift an emphasis away from trying to find a cure, and instead we focus on removing the environmental barriers and promote equal opportunities. And we amplify the voices of people with lived experience of neurodivergence, because for a long time, people working in this area didn't identify as neurodivergent, and there's been a lot of wrong assumptions made and a lot of damage has been done towards our community from some really, really harmful research, which I'm going to actually talk about in a second. And so I'm going to focus on 2 and 3 for this next section, because I wanted to talk about the many strengths of neurodivergent minds, but I also, before doing that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history and why it's really important that we focus on the strengths. Because research on neurodiversity has traditionally been framed using a medical model, and this is kind of something that treats neurodivergence as a deficit, something to be cured, something medical. It basically pathologizes us, and they kind of treat it with the medical system, doctors and allied medical professionals. And I wanted to show you just how much this has impacted this movement. And so here's the example from the diagnostic manual for to be basically diagnosed with autism. And I'm going to show you, and some people have seen my keynote recently, I did this there too. I'm going to show you all the negative language used in this diagnostic criteria. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder of variable severity characterized by persistent deficits in social communication and social interaction and restricted, repetitive patterns of behaviour, interests or activities. There's nothing there about our strengths, about who we are as people, because we have so many strengths. It's a wonderful neurotype to have. It's really just focused in on things that we apparently can't do, which is also wrong with recent research, has shown that this needs to be shifted. And people have gone beyond this, unfortunately, and I'm going to give a bit of a trigger warning here, because the research can be pretty cruel in this area, and it has been for a long time. And people have gone beyond this diagnostic criteria, and they've made a lot of assumptions about neurodivergent people. So if this is uncomfortable and you need to leave the room, I won't be offended. I also feel uncomfortable reading this research every day. So some stereotypes have gone on to say autistic people are inherently selfish, egocentric, and lack empathy. This is from research that was only done 20 years ago. And also research, again, less than 20 years ago, saying we're incapable of having moral selves, personhood, or community. There's nothing in the diagnostic criteria that says anything like that, and it's also completely false. People have been working hard to correct this misinformation, but once that misinformation is out there, it is very hard to shift. So actually, recent research has shown that autistic adults have actually been found to show enhanced generosity compared to others. And also autistic people do experience empathy, that is complete misinformation, and many even experience hyper-empathy. So we over-empathise with the world around us, and that can be a struggle when you're crying over the state of, you may just see a really sad cat. But it is still very much empathy. And autistic people are definitely capable of having moral selves. In fact, lots of studies show that we actually have heightened justice sensitivity. And it's interesting because that justice sensitivity is something that diagnosticians look out for. So it's definitely something that we experience. Many autistic people also desire meaningful relationships. And under this new paradigm, when we're looking at strengths, we're even now starting to rethink this diagnostic criteria, because it may look like communication deficits, but studies have shown that these communication deficits actually disappear when autistic people talk to other autistic people. So this is why a lot of people are missed, because we think, oh, we've got great groups of friends. We have no problem communicating. I'm fine. And so what this person did is they asked non-autistic people to observe and rate conversations between different peers in a room. 2 autistic people, 1 autistic person, and 1 non-autistic person. And 2 non-autistic people as well. So there were 3 different groups. And they asked them to rank their conversation. They said, are they good communicators? Did the conversation flow? Was information transferred? Was it a successful interaction? And what was really interesting and unsurprising for autistic people, but maybe surprising for non-autistic people, was that they ranked the non-autistic people as really great communicators. They said the conversation flowed, the information transferred, it was a great communication. But they also ranked the 2 autistic people as great communicators. Information flowed, the conversation was great, it was just they're both great communicators. Now they didn't know who was autistic and non-autistic. What was happening is when there was a non-autistic person and an autistic person in the room, they were both ranked as terrible communicators. The communication broke down, it did not flow, the information didn't transfer. And so this came up with the idea, it's a double empathy problem. It's not autistic people that have a problem with social skills and communicating. It's kind of like speaking another language. And it's empathy problems on both sides. And differences do not equal deficiencies. They add value to communities and workplaces. And there are so many neurodivergent strengths, and I can't go into them all. But we know I'm a psychologist, developmental psychologist is my background, even though I work in education now. We know that differences in brain structures and connectivity results in different strengths. That's just a given. We all have different strengths and challenges. And so you'd think that neurodivergent people with our different neurology would have some wonderful strengths as well. And in fact, increased creativity and innovation has been found in ADHD communities, autistic communities, dyslexic and dyscalculic communities, and people who identify with Tourette syndrome as well have higher rates of creativity. Deep focus and expertise in areas of interest, again, a whole different range of neurodivergences can do this. So ADHD, we hyperfocus on things that we're passionate about. Autism, we develop these spins or special interests, or we just get this love of different topics, and we become really, really fast experts in them if something's caught our eye. We have unique problem-solving approaches. So some of us are big picture thinkers, some of us are very detail-oriented. Autistic people have enhanced pattern recognition, and all neurotypes have unique problem-solving approaches. And also, we've been linked to higher levels of empathy, fairness, and justice sensitivity, which I mentioned before. But before I move on to the next section, I just wanted to give a word of warning. It's very easy to fall into that these strengths are neurodivergent superpowers. It's a very easy thing to fall into because people want to be positive and celebrate these. But sometimes it can come across as toxic positivity. And we really, if you remember, the neurodiversity movement wants to frame these differences as neutral. Everyone has strengths, everyone has challenges. And success is possible for everyone. Because being neurodivergent, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. We do have unique challenges, and they can be very real challenges. But it is really lovely now that people are starting to value our strengths. Which leads me on to this, steps for success. Because neurodivergent women and gender diverse people, people assigned female at birth, have succeeded across all fields, all around the world. Science, arts, performing arts, sport, entrepreneurship. The lists go on and on. And there are people making huge, huge strides in every single area. And one of the things that, when we look at how success happens, especially for neurodivergent people, is belief in oneself. And this can be really difficult. There's a lot of systemic and internalized barriers we face, and that can really, really wear you down. And this is a skill that you can learn. This is not something I've always been good at. But it really provides a buffer against messaging that we're too much, not enough, or broken. And these messages we get given a lot. And developing this sense of belief in oneself, it really helps us to persist, despite societal misunderstandings, discrimination, and people underestimating us. We are always underestimated. But that can sometimes be a strength. It also helps us to embrace and leverage our strengths rather than focusing solely on challenges. And believing in our own worth and capabilities makes it a lot easier to advocate for accommodations, set boundaries, which can be hard to do when we are socialised as women or gender diverse people. Boundaries are important. And we need to assert our needs in workplaces, education, and social settings. And self-advocacy naturally flows on from this self-belief. And this empowers us to navigate this world that's often not designed with our needs in mind. And advocating for our needs does help to create a sustainable environment where we can thrive, not just survive. And especially within the rigid institutions that don't automatically account for neurodivergent needs, because there's a lot of those out there too. I've been travelling the world, meeting a lot of people and seeing a lot of places where they're not ready to change. And by self-advocating, individuals can educate others about neurodiversity, challenge harmful stereotypes, and foster greater acceptance. And lastly, self-advocacy leads to broader systemic change. When more neurodivergent people raise their voices and share their experiences and needs, it paves the way for more inclusive policies and cultural shifts that benefit future generations. And before I go into talking about my work at the University of Melbourne, I just want to talk about this last one, which is strong support networks. And this could be friends, this could be family, mentors, other neurodivergent peers. And I highly recommend, if you are neurodivergent, getting a group of neurodivergent peers, because this is crucial. Having a good social network can offer validation and reassurance in times of crisis. They can also help with practical assistance and accommodations, such as body doubling, which is where sometimes executive function fails and you don't really want to start doing something, but if there's someone in the room with you, you automatically start doing it for some reason. You feel more comfortable because there's someone else not making you do it, even if they're just sitting there. You can kind of just get over that block. Or managing competing demands. I've had many of my friends and family heard me rant about, I've signed up to too many things. Why do I do this to myself? I don't know how to manage this. Help. But it also offers this connection and reduces feeling of loneliness. We know we have a loneliness epidemic, particularly within higher education. And this is for everyone, not just neurodivergent students, but it is more pronounced in neurodivergent students. And so belonging and inclusion matters, even if it's just one person. One person is all you need to be your person. And then lastly, neurodivergent burnout is intense. So having a support system ensures there are people around you to notice signs of exhaustion, provide help, and encourage rest and self-care. So a bit about myself. Before I started this project, I was actually knee-deep in burnout. I had been taking time off for years. I've always been on that kind of gifted neurodivergent track, not knowing I was neurodivergent. From childhood, always doing kind of experiments for science fairs, doing the top of the class thing. And when I had children, and at the end of my PhD, where there was a whole host of problems there, including bullying, which is never fun, I just got overwhelmed. And I thought, I'll just be a stay-at-home mum. Maybe I need a simpler life. Maybe I need to relax, get off the academic track for a while. And in a way that worked, because raising children is actually harder than an academic career. And it really helped me to figure out my own neurodivergence very fast after figuring theirs out too. But what it also gave me was time to think about what I really wanted, and developing the support network and figuring out self-belief. I had to find it again. Because not everyone has the privilege of being able to self-advocate, or the energy, or have strong support networks. When I hit burnout, I was living in a different country. We had no family support. There was lockdowns. We just had myself, my husband, and my kids. And fostering self-belief takes time. And so what we advocate for is finding or creating supportive environments that support different working styles, not forcing conformity. And this is really important. It was something I was thinking about a lot during my time recuperating. And so universal design is this philosophy that aims to create these products, environments, and experiences that are accessible and usable by as many people as possible, regardless of their age, ability, or background, without the need for adaptation or disclosure. Because of the many negative things, because of the stereotypes, there's a lot of people afraid to disclose. In fact, from our studies at the University of Melbourne, we know only 50% of our staff are currently out as neurodivergent. And also, it was around 60-something% of our students were out to at least one person, and that was just another student. Now, this is not a University of Melbourne problem, this is a worldwide problem, and it's just a show of the systemic kind of discrimination that's happened over time. And so, which leads me really nicely into talking about how the project basically started. So as I said, I was knee-deep in burnout. I had withdrawn from academics, even though I loved it, mainly due to bullying and many other ideas, because I've been on lots of side quests during my PhD. I call them side quests because my supervisors were like, someone needs to lead this project. You'll be great at it. And I'm like, oh, new, fun, exciting, yes, do it. And say, okay, someone really loves your intervention that you developed for your PhD. Can you take a year off, go to this different city, redevelop the intervention, help a lot of people? Oh, yes, of course I want to help people. And this kept going on and on and on, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't complete my PhD and why I keep putting things off. And I was really struggling with that hit to my self-concept. And so dealing with that, not knowing what I wanted to do, stuck in burnout, my friend Sarah, who also did a PhD in the same place, said, look, I've got this job at the University of Melbourne. It's only a small one. I'm going to interview people about what it's like to be neurodivergent. as a staff member and postgrad student, you've just been diagnosed, we want only neurodivergent interviewers, come back. And I said, nope, I've got a tiny baby, my youngest was I think 6 months. I'm not ready. And she said, no, you love this, I'll job share with you. I said, oh, fine. So I jumped back in and I started interviewing people, and their stories time and time again reflected mine. And these people were super successful, but they were struggling. And the areas that they were struggling in were all the same areas I did. And it made me realize it wasn't just me, this is systemic. And we couldn't just sit back and sit on this data that showed people were really struggling and do nothing. We kind of felt obligated to do something, even though we're only 3 early career researchers. The person who hired us was early career as well. And so we started putting feelers out. Be like, okay, what can we do? What can we do here? How can we develop a project or try and advocate for changes? And we keep hitting walls, because we often say at the University of Melbourne and other universities, our committees have committees. So make a subcommittee to talk about this, and then go to this committee, and then go to this committee. We're like, no, that's going to take too much time. No, we don't have the time, people are hurting now. And I was back to myself by this stage. I was really angry and wanting to change things again. And so we decided to take a risk. We decided, okay, we're going to do something and ask for forgiveness later. We're going to email the VC, our Vice Chancellor, directly. We're going to share what we found. And we're going to make a video, kind of like, if any of you have seen Legally Blonde, Al Wood's kind of making this pitch video. We kind of made our own little video saying, you know, here's the problem, surprise, it's not great. Please support us and do something about it. And we were really, really lucky that he caught the vision and said yes. Now the pathway hasn't always been smooth. There are people who are upset that we broke the status quo by jumping all of these levels. But there's simultaneously a lot more people who are very glad we did, because we managed to make a lot of changes in a very short amount of time. Because after all, when we look at disability, the social model says that it's not actually what's within us, it's the removal of physical, attitudinal, communication and social barriers. That's the key to inclusion and success. So this is our project team. It's myself, Dr. Sarah Timperley, and who's now an assistant professor, Matthew Harrison. And we all co-lead this project together. We're all neurodivergent. We all identify in different ways. And our main goal is to empower our community and to help the University of Melbourne become a global leader in neurodiversity inclusive research and practice. Now, I was sharing earlier with your inclusion co-captains that this isn't a University of Melbourne problem, and I said it a little bit before. It is a worldwide problem. But what was really great about our university is they were willing to take the risk and to fund us, to lift the rock, ask some hard questions, and actually publish some really troubling data. And if you want to see some of that, we've got our keynote conversations on our website, and we share some of the data we have kind of gathered over the last year and a half. And some of it's not pretty. And our main aims are to build a stronger sense of community for neurodivergent staff and students, to improve the understanding of neurodiversity and neuro-affirming teaching and learning practices across the university, to connect neurodivergent staff and students with support services within the university, and to conduct world-class neurodiversity-affirming research. Now, as research fellows, we haven't been spending as much time publishing our research because, again, every new piece of research we get, we're like, no, practical solutions, we need solutions now. But those articles are well underway, and we will be getting those out very soon. But some of the things, and this again links back to the strengths of neurodivergent people and our tenacity. This is some of the things that we've done in 2024 and 2025, and so this is going to be going a year and a half. We did a staff and student needs analysis, and these were done by surveys, and this is now the largest data set of a single institution in the world. We developed and have conducted 57 neurodiversity inclusive workshops around the university, covering how to support staff, how to support students, how to build better curriculums, a whole host of different things. We held the first ever Celebrating Neurodiversity Research Symposium, where we got people from across the university to talk about their work, if they're neurodivergent, or about neurodiversity affirming research. And we had people there who are experts in their field, world-renowned, but have never been asked to talk about neurodiversity and never had something accepted to a conference to talk about neurodiversity. We have been invited to be the consultants on the redesign of our disability services and the redesign of 6 buildings. We have toured and presented at and provided advice to lots of different universities around the world. And from that, I've launched the Higher Education Neurodiversity Network, which we launched this week, which we have people from all around the world interested in this space, and I'm helping to facilitate conversations so we can make a global push in this area, because one, that's an area I'm passionate about, 2, my email list inbox is getting overwhelmed. And I keep getting asked the same questions from everyone around the world. And I'm like, just put you all in one space, and let's just, all of us talk. And this is an exaggeration, but it doesn't feel like an exaggeration sometimes. We've had, this one's over 600,000 coffees with people who want to collaborate. But I really think that this shows the need and the appetite for this work. And I want to leave some room for questions, so I'll whip through this last little bit. And so how I wanted to end was on how we can build a more inclusive community. This is advice for when you go into the workforce. You could even start putting it here. This is teachers can start doing some of this stuff here, and give you a taste of what my research has been kind of turned into in a practical way, and some of those workshops I give at the university. So the first is make environments more sensory friendly. So a potential barrier to inclusion is sensory processing differences. So, you know, you've got the regular ones you think about: sight, touch, hearing. But our ability to regulate temperature, our ability to know where we are in space. That one's a big one for me. I bump into doorways all the time, and normally I'm covered in bruises, but I don't have one today. Internal processes as well, so knowing when we're hungry, thirsty, sleepy, all of these things. They're either dialed right up or dialed right down. So people who are hypersensitive may need more input to feel comfortable. So I'm hypersensitive to touch and movement, and so when I'm stressed, I like to dance around, and I listen to loud music, and then that makes me feel more regulated. But people who are hypersensitive to input need less input to feel more comfortable. So if I happen to share an office with someone who finds loud music, even through my headphones though, and me moving around difficult, they would need me to leave the room, basically. And I would do that to accommodate them. And this can impact neurodivergent students in lots of ways. It leads to sensory discomfort, overwhelm, difficulties focusing, increased masking, which is where we hide our neurodivergent traits in order to pass as neurotypical. Challenges, interpersonal challenges due to misunderstandings. People might think that you are not doing something because you don't like them, but really the lights are flickering and it's just really hard to focus. And disengagement and dropout. And this is an article that I wrote about this based on our original research at the Faculty of Education. And this is a quote from one of our participants. Like, how can I dodge this? How can I sit through this meeting and not have a panic attack? I spend all day, all my time, thinking about how I'm responding to the environment. And you can imagine this would make things very hard to do your job or to do your study. And so one way of accommodating this through universal design is when you work or meet with others, just ask how they'd like to meet with you. In person, via Zoom. Sometimes Zoom can take away some of those sensory inputs and they can actually concentrate. Consider the layouts of the rooms where you meet, work and study in your classrooms. Can you dim the fluorescent lights? Because that's one thing a lot of us agree on, fluorescent lights are just wrong. And can you just rely on natural light instead? Can you reduce distractions such as visual clutter, movement and ambient noise? Can you provide spaces for people to take sensory breaks in and normalise taking breaks when needed, like low impact sensory spaces, or spaces where sensory seekers, like myself most of the time, can move and talk freely if they get the Zoomies. And normalise the use of sensory aids, such as noise cancelling headphones and stim toys and fidgets. And then the last one, yeah, I think I can get this, and they had a couple of questions, which is to reduce unnecessary mental effort. So we often have differences in executive function. So these are high mental effort cognitive processes that basically are involved in organising and regulating our thoughts and behaviours. So as an example, there's working memory. I'm really bad at this one. So it's holding information in your memory when you're performing other tasks. So if, like, trying to remember instructions someone's given you while they're still talking to you, and then the earlier instructions just fly out the window because you can't process them into other memory. The ability to choose what to focus on and focus on it and not attend to other things, like focusing on your teacher when something really exciting is happening outside. Or this one as well, case in point today, the ability to perceive the passage of time, estimate how long things would take, and sequence events. So this one I've always struggled with, thinking that writing a good essay can be done the night before it's due. Now I'd like to say that it doesn't work because I've got many A's and A+ doing that, but try not to do that. You will get in trouble one day. So who does this impact? This impacts everyone. Everyone has executive function. And executive function is difficult for everyone, regardless of neurotype. But it is more difficult when people are tired, stressed, or during periods of high cognitive load. But they're particularly difficult for ADHDers and to some degree autistic people because of the way our brains are structured. Because our brains are more actually interconnected than neurotypical people's brains. So they're constantly processing a higher volume of information at any given time. So some studies have even estimated this to be 42% of poor autistic people. And this is a strength and a challenge because we can be really clever, we can hyper-focus, we can make these really amazing links between things, but our executive function skills are very much impacted because of this additional cognitive load. So, ways of accommodating these before my final thoughts: minimize auditory and visual distractions to help your students focus. This one goes for the teachers in the room, particularly when giving them important information. Provide written instructions to help reduce the load on working memories. Consider using bullet points and bolding key points like you've seen throughout my talk. It helps people to eye track across the screen, and so that you know that people aren't then jumping ahead while they're reading there, but they're not listening to you, and then they get lost and then they don't take in information. Chunk large projects or topics into small chunks, and if there are multiple things that need to be actioned, please just provide explicit instructions about which tasks to be prioritised. Especially for us ADHDers, we are going to do the fun one first. Even if it's not the most important one, we have an interest-based nervous system, so we need to be explicitly told. And so the final thoughts, and I'm sorry that it is going to be pushing on 45 minutes, question everything you've heard about neurodiversity under the medical model. Challenge harmful stereotypes, stigma and assumptions wherever possible. Listen to neurodivergent voices and include them in decision making. Continue advocating for inclusion in schools and workplaces through the adoption of neurodiversity-affirming practices. Be kind to yourself. This is a big one. We're still in the early stages of the neurodiversity movement, and it can be hard to constantly fight for our rights to exist unmasked. And that goes for if you don't want to disclose, you don't have to. We know, live in a world where disclosure is a right, it is a privilege. And so we need to be working to make society safe so we can disclose and feel safe to do so. And it's also hard to shift beliefs and sit with the knowledge that you may have been perpetrating harm unknowingly. And this is for neurodivergent people too. I did developmental psychology. I got trained on the medical model. I believed what I was taught, and I unknowingly perpetrated harm by not looking into it further. And so I sit with that, and I try to make up for that with what I'm doing now. Because when we know better, we do better. Because look at what neurodiversity-affirming messaging can do. So this is from my needs analysis. And so I looked at whether students have overheard neurodiversity-affirming comments from students, staff, and professional staff. And I also asked a whole lot of questions about bonds and feeling belonging and friendship. And when students have overheard these comments, not just having them to them, just overheard this change in culture, they're way more likely to have a sense of belonging, to get friendships, and bond with the university and the students. So this messaging really matters, and you can make a big difference by just doing a few shifts. Thank you. And I pushed it right for 35 minutes when I was supposed to leave a lot more room for questions. But I don't know if I'm allowed to say there's questions, or you guys have to rush off. You still fine for questions? Cool. If you need to rush off, that's also fine. Are there any questions? Yes. We'll get someone to bring the mic to you.
sorry, Dr. Jessica, I heard there are companies in the United States, maybe in Australia as well, they hire specifically autistic people because they do have all this spectrum of higher abilities. Is it true?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
there are some in Australia, thank you.
Yeah, there are some in Australia. I know also a lot of detective work as well. People are purposefully looking for autistic people because of the pattern recognition. There are tech companies who purposefully hire neurodivergent people. And it is an area where people are increasingly trying to look towards because they value these strengths. These strengths are the things that fit into what their business model is. Yeah.
So there are.
Yeah, there are.
They don't write them themselves.
No, they don't advertise them normally. But there are middlemen, so the people who are trying to find those companies and then advertise them. And we've been working with some of them to try and show people pathways. So we can maybe put some on our website.
Yeah, we just have one question that's been submitted anonymously.
Sure.
How can we support and encourage neurodivergent individuals and highlight their strengths in everyday interactions?
That's a good question. Very, very multifaceted answer. The first would just be to listen to them. And one thing that often neurodivergent people struggle with is miscommunication and feeling misheard. And so I think assuming goodwill and assuming that the conversation and asking questions is for clarity and not because they're trying to talk over you. And so it's kind of respecting different communication styles. It is letting people be themselves and celebrating that, and kind of just highlighting their strengths. Oftentimes we just get told our weaknesses over and over again, but you can be like, hey, no, that's wrong. Did you see this wonderful thing you did the other day? Can you be nicer to yourself? Would you talk to a friend that way? Because we often develop this internal voice that's really critical. So I think showing up for people and being just kind of that mirror to all their good qualities is a really good way to be a good friend.
I think within the slide there's a lot of emphasis on education, and I've seen some really interesting research papers and data that you've put out. So in general, what are some ways that you would suggest to continue to educate yourself and other people on neurodiversity and similar things?
Great. There are lots of good books being written by neurodivergent authors, especially in the last couple of years. I'd highly recommend looking into them, like Ellie Middleton. There's a lot of Australian authors as well. Clem Bastow is one I can think of. There's lots of other names, but I struggle with names. What has actually, this is a double-edged sword because there is misinformation on there, but TikTok is surprisingly good at trying to break down stigma, as long as you follow people who are neurodivergent and kind of know what you can tell that they know what they're talking about rather than spreading misinformation. I would say there's YouTubers as well. Just continue reading, educating yourself. It is one of the #1 way of changing mindsets and battling discrimination. We know it's education, it is exposure to that population. So surrounding yourself with neurodivergent people, asking them questions, but don't just rely on information from them because that self-advocacy and constantly having to educate people can be tiring. Yeah, I think just keep asking questions, basically.
About the topic of books, I recommend you all check out the library display. Our wonderful librarians, Ms. Fee and Mr. Yah, have put on a display for University Celebration Week, so please check it out. Are there any last questions?
How would you go about challenging adults in our lives that may be a hindrance to accommodations and such? I've heard so many stories of people who have their parents with all good intent have been denying them accommodations, diagnostic, because they have a different idea and the previous idea of what neurodiversity is a very traditional and archaic idea.
Yeah.
And I've heard so many stories of people who should be getting accommodations they need. Even my own parents just had the idea that, oh, this is how the world works, you need to get used to it. And I know you were saying that part of your, briefly mentioned, part of your journey was your children's journey as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, how would you say to approach that?
With great care. I would like to say I have all the answers to that. Without throwing people in my family under the bus, there are also similar problems, and the same with a lot of people I know who got diagnosed as adults because of that, the old stereotypes, basically. One thing, again, it's about education and time. There's no one sentence to say to make people understand because it's been so ingrained in them. Beliefs, mind shifts, they take time. So it's kind of dotting around information that they may just happen to pick up. So there's particular people who visit our household that I just happen to leave certain books out for because they have those old-fashioned beliefs but should possibly be looking into it. There are TV shows that show better representation, or things online that say, hey look, this is really interesting. And there's I think one of the biggest things is about changing hearts as well, because there's a lot of time people won't shift their beliefs and take more knowledge in because they need that emotional shift first, they need that emotional connection. And they need to feel safe being wrong, and not everyone feels safe to be wrong. So it's a journey. And I'm hoping it'll change in time, but the more advocacy we do and then the culture kind of has to be dragged along with us. It doesn't quite answer your question, but you're not the only one struggling with that.
Okay. On behalf of the Macroft community, we would just like to say thank you for all your efforts.
Yeah, we really learned a lot more about neurodiversity-affirming research, and we're really grateful that you came to give this talk. Thank you so much. Here's a token of our appreciation.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. These conversations, these are the types of things that will change people's minds. The more we can get out and talk about this, the better the world will be.
We're just speaking to each other through symbols. Body language. I just want to thank you, Jessica, for coming and sharing your story and research with our school. We are trying to make lots of changes here over the last few years to have a more inclusive practice, and I think it's really helpful for our students to hear that we're doing some of these things here already, but it also bolsters our efforts here to do better by the students and to know that we're setting them up for success in the future. So we're so grateful that you could be here. And I know you're all ready to go to class, so if you could just show your appreciation with a round of applause.